For as long as I can remember, I've always loved building things with clay. My favorite thing to play with as a child was Play-Doh. I would spend entire afternoons molding different items, animals and people, without ever getting bored. As I grew older and matured, my passion for sculpting grew with me, and by age 11, I was already taking pottery and precious metal clay classes with adults, mostly 4 times my age. It didn't matter to me that most of my friends weren't interested at all in what I did. The act of creating, glazing, firing pieces captivated my imagination. And while most kids my age wanted a game system or trendy clothes or shoes, I was bugging my folks for my own pottery wheel. I came from modest means, but luckily, both my parents supported my passion, and by the time I was 13, my bedroom was more like an art studio that happened to have a bed in it. All my time and effort was paying off too, and the pieces I made began to become more high quality more often. In fact, by my freshman year in high school, I was confident enough in my skills that I began to look into submitting my art for contests, making pots, vases, sculptures for friends and relatives as gifts. That was the beginning of the dark path I've walked down up to this very day. I first noticed it on a bowl that I made for my uncle for his 57th birthday. When I was 14, my dad told me his older brother had been a heavy smoker for most of his life. But the day my now 18-year-old cousin had been born, he smoked his last Camel. He wasn't looking back. I thought this was a great accomplishment, so I wanted to incorporate it into the piece that I was making for him. I used a different colored glaze for his initials within the bowl than I used for the rest of it, and then I designed the piece to have some cracks in it after firing. My plan was to try out the art style of kintsugi. That translates to gold joinery, and it's an art style from Japan. Kintsugi is the art of fixing broken pottery with a special lacquer that's powdered with gold, silver, or platinum. It's supposed to be a means of recognizing a piece's unique history by highlighting the cracks and flaws instead of hiding them, but turning those flaws into beauty and making the piece even more unique than it previously was. So my idea was to have a piece like that for my uncle, to show my esteem for him on how far he'd come in his past when it came to his own health. Something went wrong, though. Something I couldn't explain, and all the research in the world couldn't answer. The special lacquer, though it was powdered with gold, came out as a black obsidian. I was completely bewildered at the spectacle before me. As I said, all the research turned up nothing, but the bowl itself wasn't a failure, in my opinion. It seemed to have a dark beauty about it, and the special lacquer turned black instead of gold. That was only something that heightened the uniqueness in my eyes. I ended up giving it to my uncle for his birthday, and he was absolutely thrilled with it. 6 months later, my uncle was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. After 3 months of intense treatments, his body couldn't handle it anymore, and he passed away. The whole family was devastated. I was given a week off from school so my parents and I could travel across the country and attend his funeral. It was a hard fact to swallow. My uncle's death and the fact that we were staying in my now widowed aunt's house for the trip made it worse. It's hard to get to sleep when you can hear your aunt crying quietly to herself in her now lonesome bed. More than once, I was shedding tears too, as I was drifting off to sleep. It was on the last day there that I did a little snooping in my aunt's room. My parents had taken her out for breakfast earlier in the morning. Wouldn't be back till later, so I decided to see if there was any memorabilia of my uncle I'd like to see before I may never see it again. One of the first things I noticed was the bowl I made for him, displayed proudly, front and center on the dresser. Couldn't help but smile at the memory of giving it to him. I then decided to look a little bit in his desk, off in a corner of the room. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I was a teenager filled with angst at the time. I didn't see any issue doing what I did. Going through his drawers, I didn't find anything of interest until I saw a very large envelope from the hospital. And opening it, I found it was the x-rays of his chest from when they discovered the cancer. Holding them up to the window with the morning light shining through, I grimaced at the sight of his lungs filled with long, black streaks that showed the damage his years of smoking had done. As I looked more, though, a wave of familiarity washed over me. I'd seen this somewhere. I knew I had. I continued staring in hopes that it would hit me, but the knowledge evaded me, and I ended up trying to toss the X-ray across the room in frustration. It flapped through the air a bit and then landed on the floor in front of the dresser. With a sigh, I walked over and picked it up, but as I stood from bending over, my eyes fell upon the bowl again, and everything clicked. Every blackened crevice, every vein of obsidian that was in that bowl looked like it had been transplanted directly from the X-ray. I looked back and forth between the bowl and the X-ray in shock. There was no way this could be happening, yet evidence was right there in front of my face. I ended up saying nothing, trying to dismiss what I had discovered as some weird coincidence. Move on with my life. I kept up with my pottery and sculpting, but never attempted kintsugi again. I just couldn't bring myself to do it, and would just end up recycling any broken pieces back into clay. Fortunately, I didn't have to do this very often, as my skill had increased by leaps and bounds, and rare was the time anything I made broke. During summer break after my freshman year, one of my old friends, a boy I'd known since elementary school, asked me to make something for him. Now, he was a huge nerd, into card games, Dungeons & Dragons, anime, all that stuff. He wanted me to make a dragon or an ornate goblet for him. But I decided to do something different. I made a nice vase and glazed, so that it would look like there was a Japanese cherry blossom on both sides. I'd done things like this before on other work, so when I got it back from firing, I was a little confused. Everything seemed normal, except the cherry blossoms on the tree. Now, I knew I'd used a pink glaze on them, but they were instead blood red. Not only that, they weren't in the pattern that I'd originally glazed them in. I knew from experience that sometimes glazing doesn't work out exactly how you envisioned it, but this was different from anything I'd experienced. Plus, the new pattern the glaze had taken looked very disturbing to me. I couldn't place it at the time, but something about it evoked a primal disgust in me. And I wanted to destroy the vase right then and there. Unfortunately, my friend was with me when I got the piece back from firing, and he told me that he absolutely loved it. Even when I pointed out the changed color and the weird pattern of the leaves. He told me he didn't see anything wrong with the vase. And even if it wasn't what I originally planned for it, he didn't care. He was so excited about the vase that I decided to just be happy that he liked his gift. I wonder, to this day, if I had been more aggressive in my complaints, had broken it right then and there, if it would have changed things. I found out what happened to him on the first day of sophomore year. The principal came on the loudspeaker to announce that he had passed. And it was a day or two later that I found out that the day before school started, he'd been out walking his dog at night. Drunk driver in a pickup fell asleep at the wheel, drove off the road onto the sidewalk, and plowed straight through him. I never saw the crime photos, nor could I bring myself to visit the street where he died, but from experiences after, I can confidently say his blood and gore spatter on the sidewalk matched the same pattern of the blood-red cherry blossoms on the vase I'd given him. It took until my freshman year of college before I figured out the pattern, and by then 4 more people I cared about had died. 2 were friends from school, 1 was my first summer crush, and the last was my aunt, leaving my cousin without parents at 23 years old. Each piece they'd received from me was different. Each had varying times from when they'd received it to when they died, but the pattern on each work of art never lied about the method. The worst was the flower vase that I gave my aunt. I made it as bright and colorful as possible, yet somehow on the tree I designed into it, some unexpected running of the glaze happened, resulting in a long, brown line hanging from one of the branches of the trees, ending in an open circle. I didn't notice it until after I'd given it to her. She refused to part with it, saying it was absolutely gorgeous. She felt a sense of calm and peace looking at it. They ended up cutting her down from the elm tree in her backyard, the anniversary of my uncle's death. Like I said earlier, I realized then what the pattern was. You see, I'd made hundreds of pots, vases, sculptures up till that point, but it was only the ones I'd made for someone specific that seemed to foretell what their death would be. This brought up a major conflict in my mind. On the one hand, if I just made things for the sake of making them, nothing bad would ever be predicted in my work. But in the case, I could never give anyone anything that I ever made, even though sculpting and pottery was my life and I wanted to share my creations with everyone I loved. In the end, I decided to play it safe, and though I continued my art degree throughout college, I did as little work with ceramics and clay as possible, to the disappointment of all my professors. It's been 3 years since I graduated, and now I have an apartment in New York City where I work for the MOCANY, or the Museum of Ceramic Art, New York. Up until a week ago. See, 7 days ago, I decided to call my mom to catch up. We talked for a while about how life was going for my parents, how life was going for me in the past. It was then my mom brought up that I had never made her anything despite my talents. I quickly thought up the excuse that I never thought I would be skilled enough to make anything worth my gratitude and love that I held for both of them. My mom laughed at this. "Well, you certainly didn't think that way when you were younger," she retorted. "After all, your father still has that weird little clay figure you gave him when you were 3. My blood turned to ice at this. I had no memory of making anything like that. I pressed my mom for details. "Oh yeah, you came to him all excited with this little figure, claiming it was him, and he just absolutely loved it. Even to this day, it's a shame we didn't get you better clay back then. Lots of bits of clay have fallen off of it, making all these tiny holes in the chest. He still loves it as much as he did back then. It's part of the reason we decided to support your love for sculpting in the first place." My heart pounding, I asked my mom where Dad was at the moment. She told me he was at the bar with a few friends. Well, I hurriedly said goodbye to my mom, and I hung up to call my dad. I ended up calling 3 times, each time going to his voicemail. I was going to call my mom back when I forced myself to stop and think. I gave this supposed figure to him when I was 3 years old, and nothing had happened to him all these years. Why should something suddenly occur out of the blue just because I discovered I gave him something? I should calm down. I should take it easy. Maybe I could organize a trip, dispose of the thing when I visited them. And after that, I never tried getting rid of the harbingers of doom I'd created before, although I'd never got the chance to do so either. Had a few glasses of wine to calm myself, relax, watch some Netflix. I went to bed. It was 3 a.m. when the call from my mom came. Sobs, wails. She told me a fight had broken out in the parking lot of the bar my dad was drinking at. Being the good Samaritan he was, filled with some liquid courage, he walked over to break it up. He seen the fight was far more serious than he anticipated, and his attempted good deed ended up with a blast from a sawed-off shotgun to the chest. He died shortly after the ambulance had gotten to him. I cried until the sun rose that day. I still feel like I'm somehow responsible for the deaths of all those that I've given to. The thing that's brought me the most joy in my life, what I feel like I was born to do, has brought nothing but misery and death to those I loved. I feel lost, confused, angry. Why me? Why do I have to be the one who sees death before it happens and somehow always be unable to stop it? Why does the craft that resonates with me, body and soul, that gives me life, that gives my life meaning, have to be cursed? Cursed to show me the deaths of those I want most to live. What kind of God would do that to me? With that in mind, yesterday I began to work on my final piece. I'd never worked so hard on a single project before in my life, and last night it was done. It was a sculpture. Sculpture of me, standing only about a foot high, but getting every last detail of me absolute. I made it so detailed because it was a gift. It was a gift to me. All the other pieces I'd ever made, while I kept some of them I'd never made for me specifically, but this piece was different. Every second spent on it, I knew I was making it for myself because I had to know. I didn't want this weight curse on my shoulders anymore. I had to know my end. I spent all day sculpting, glazing, and firing it overnight in my personal kiln. I was surprised this morning when it came out perfect. Not a single crack, imperfection to show broken bones, dismembered parts, no glaze dripping or discoloration to suggest blood or gore or anything. It was a remarkably beautiful sculpture. Even if I didn't intend to think of myself as all that beautiful, it truly was my best work yet. But I type this all out now because I know the truth. See, my avatar made of clay had been on my desk all day. I was waiting for something to happen to it, yet nothing ever did, and a slight spark of hope ignited within me. Maybe I'd lost my power to foretell death. Maybe with this act of creating just for the creator, I'd freed myself from whatever curse I had been hanging over my head since the moment I took my first breath. In my excitement, I decided another glass of wine was in order, even though I have, or rather had, a long drive in the morning to reach my mother's house to help plan for the funeral I had. I felt a heavy burden being lifted from my shoulders. I stood up suddenly to go to the kitchen, and in my flurry of movement, the statue was knocked off my desk, and I watched it fall. I watched it hit my tiled stone floor. I watched it break. Thousands of fractures encompassed the body parts, the legs, the head. Staring at the broken body, my broken body, I realized that the stone floor, and especially the one large tile sculpture landed on, looked familiar. In fact, it looked almost identical to the broken, worn, inviting concrete sidewalk 15 stories down from my bedroom window. Hey there once again, kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to give you a big thank you for watching tonight's video. If you guys ever wanted to help support the show, you can always do so if you watch the show on youtube.com/MrCreepyPasta or find the MrCreepyPasta Storytime podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, and on Spotify. And also, if you ever want to check out my wife's tea shop, it's etsy.com/ivorymonocletea, where she sells hand-blended herbal teas in the theme of Dungeons & Dragons and Harry Potter and Final Fantasy and the like. You can find the link for it, as well as many, many, many other links in the description down below. And, drumroll please, a big, big, big thank you to everybody supporting me at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. People such as Taysia-lynn, Genobaga-Arneho, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Miles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Dr. Strawberry, Chompski, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Tine-Janzen, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Buddy Burroughs, Stephen Van Huss, Kai Albertson, Goonington, G. Weevil 3, Chance Burnett, Diane Kraus, Asia, Gabrielle the baca, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, Titty Connoisseur, really? Titty Connoisseur? Melissa Sweigart, Dante Rowe, Last Blade Song, Cross Rights, TheGingerBroz, Eliminator 86, Andrew Steinberg, Jason Sistma, Holy Realm, and Rafael Rodriguez. Thank you so much to you guys out there on Patreon, to all of you listening to either the podcast or the YouTube show. And that is everything, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and sweet dreams.